So we have a situation now in America where 4 corporations control roughly 85% of America's beef production. And this continues. They jockey for position and they keep buying each other out. And this is a trend that's been, basically developing since the 1960s, ramping up in the 80s and 90s in particular, and in the 2000s. We don't have much antitrust protection in America. We have some decent laws that could be much stronger. I would argue that we need to revisit antitrust law in America, that actually that's a significant, major factor in American food production and American agriculture that needs to be looked at, and redefine what it means to be a monopoly or an oligopoly, as we call it, when you've just got a few controlling the entire economy or food sector. So this is happening for a variety of reasons. I mean, basically, we've allowed, under Democrats and Republicans both have allowed merger after merger of these large corporations. And these corporations are doing it obviously for profit. They're also doing it for market control. And, we get to a situation across our food economy, whether it's in beef or other meat production or supermarkets, where corporations are amazingly doing this in a certain sense to survive. It's almost like we've had this mantra in American farming called get big, get out. Not you and I, but the agriculture secretaries and the farm bureaus and the deciders of farming have had this mantra of get big or get out. And it's really the same across the rest of our food economy. So beef production, chicken, hog production, you name it. Any sector, any piece of the American food pie you want to look at has a situation where you've got 4 corporations controlling more than 40% of the market and up to 85% of the market in the case of beef. And mainstream economists have studied this over time and said that's a situation that becomes anti-competitive and monopolistic. Now, the problem is, we don't have adequate regulation and enforcement of antitrust to say, well, maybe the standard should actually be higher, and in terms of triggering antitrust law, but also you can have regional control of a market. You can have 4 corporations having 85%, but one corporation might have 100% in a certain state or region. So this again has decimated small livestock producers, small farmers, pricing them out, buying up their corporations that I've investigated and researched, buying up other farmers' land, knocking them out of production, forcing them to produce the hogs or the beef for the large corporation, and they have no other marketplace that they can go to. So they have no negotiating. The smaller producers will have no negotiating power in that situation. They have to sell to this large corporation, and there's just been no stopgap. In many respects, there's actually been a rollback of protections in the federal government. Now in the Trump administration, they're actually rolling back some of the efforts that have been made, some of the progress that's been made, slow as it is, to try to prevent this vertical control in which hog processing and beef processors, for instance, control every aspect of livestock production, from the growing or raising of livestock to the slaughtering of them. So we really don't have the kinds of protections we need to be having. Where else are they going to go? There are niche markets. We are seeing, some promise in, if we're going to have any meat production, having it be organic and grass-fed is at least better for us, better for the cow or the hog in their case, not grass-fed, in their own situation, and free-range chickens. And, there are problems with that. There's, problems in the sense that they're still often confined. They're not, there's too much of it. There's far too much meat production in America. If we're going to have any at all, it's far too much and far too consolidated. But at least there are some situations where in the Midwest you're seeing small producers go into niche markets in grass-fed and So they're able to survive. I don't think that's the answer. I don't think that's the solution to the problem, but by any margin. But it's at least something for the farmer. Every sector of our food system is somewhat different, has its own little set of market dynamics, but in just about every single category, we're seeing 4 corporations controlling 40 to 50 to 60% of everything from we talked about the animal production, but also grain production, seeds, which is the lifeblood of food, controlled by just Monsanto, Syngenta, and a couple other corporations at the top controlling DuPont, Dow Chemical, controlling this situation. So everything from flour milling to grain production, again, we're seeing 4 or 5 corporations controlling 40 to 50% or 60% of the market. And so again, what this means is how many corporations can farmers sell to? What are the options for farmers? And what are the demands on farmers? And what are the expectations? It drives the supply chain that we talked about earlier, where essentially farmers have to play by their rules. Another situation is in the chicken industry, where there's been this phenomenal consolidation and control of the broiler chicken industry, where a few corporations control almost the entire industry. And we have classic cases of contract farmers, these farmers across the South and Midwest who are forced to grow chickens under contract for Purdue and for these other corporations. And all the terms are dictated by the corporation. The price that they're going to sell at, the type of feed they're going to use, the antibiotics they're going to use, other drugs they're going to use to raise them. But all the risk falls on the farmer. So if they lose a big portion of the flock, which happens, you get various diseases. They can spread like wildfire, especially with consolidated warehouses of animals like that. Those risks fall on the farmer. So we have an incredible situation where 70% of these contract chicken growers in America are living under the poverty line or around the poverty line. So, again, this is a disaster for the environment. It's a disaster for farmers and farm economies, and not good for our health. Yeah, our farming system, which is again driven by these large-scale corporate needs and the supermarket industry, it's not just a few corporations, it's really the whole food economy. I think it's important to think in terms of the food economy, which is controlled by these handful of corporations at the top. What does that demand? What kind of production does that demand? And this has been trending for many years, since the 1940s, but it really, even you could go back further, in terms of demanding this kind of concept of fence row to fence row farming, and not really thinking about the future of our topsoil, for instance, or other aspects of farm ecology, and just all about production for this season, production for next season. And so as we get to that situation where you have, again, monoculture production, you do heavy till agriculture using massive machinery, plowing up the soil. You're ruining all the nutrients, life underneath the soil, churning it up, exposing it to the sun in ways that are not helpful because you've basically already killed the life underneath it. And then you're not adding any real new life to the soil. You're just giving it these chemical fertilizers. And you're not rotating crops. You're not having a diversity of nutrients go back into the soil. So this whole combination of what means of, ways that farmers are producing now is destroying our topsoil. We have maybe 20 or 30 years maximum left for topsoil across most of the Midwest. A lot of it's already dead. So we're talking about what's left of it. And soil scientists have looked at this and seen the rapidly diminishing depth of topsoil. So, across Iowa and other parts of the country used to have, just such a rich deep layer of topsoil, that you could just keep going, and now we've got just this thin upper crust of topsoil left where it's even alive. So it matters tremendously for the future of our food production, and it also means that we use more water when our topsoil is dead, and it also means that we're using more petrochemicals and we're reliant on that to, again, inject life into dead soil. And it could take generations to replenish that soil. Soil and seeds don't get talked about as much as other elements of our food system often, but these are the most essential elements in food production. Yeah, we have a subsidy system that we renew every 5 years called the Farm Bill, and the subsidy system is just one small part of that. A lot of it's transferred into crop insurance now, but basically there are a few mechanisms that are used to subsidize and support agriculture and farming. And, I'm in favor of public investments in agriculture, so it's not an issue of whether we should spend our tax dollars on food and farming. I think absolutely we should. It's one of the most essential things that we could possibly spend our tax dollars on, our public investments on. Question is, how and where do we do it? So if we're giving our subsidies to, almost all of it to the top 10% of large-scale farmers, and some non-farmers, by the way, who are paid not to grow, that seems like an absolutely ridiculous approach that doesn't help us get to the kind of food system that we want to get to. There's a long history of how this developed out of emergency crop payments and farm supports starting up in the 1930s under Roosevelt, FDR, that basically over time became a permanent system. And the commodity lobbies in the South and the Midwest, there's a lot of it's very political. So these lobbies, these politicians in the South and parts of the Midwest started to control farm policy. We have food produced all across this country, and yet the subsidy system is dominated by just a handful of crops, basically, corn, soy, wheat, cotton, sugar, a little bit as well, and then oil seeds and a few others. And all of these are raw ingredients. So that's the other key piece that we need to think about is, why do we have the subsidy system? We're now supporting a system with our tax dollars that is producing not only these monocultures and pesticide use and all of that and large-scale agriculture, but it's also producing raw ingredients for processed foods, raw ingredients for livestock feed, and for fuel. So this is the model that we have now. So there are a lot of impediments to changing it, a lot of heavy-duty interests at the top who would prevent this from changing because they want that uniform production. They want those raw ingredients. They rely on them. Coca-Cola relies on all that cheap subsidized corn to produce the soda that, as we know, is contributing to so many health problems now among kids and others. And so, we're paying again afterwards for, all the consumption of whether it's soda and other forms of sugar or too much meat in our diets, and these are subsidies we pay basically twice.